Welcome to Volume 1 of the Video Guide to British Birds. This new edition includes more moving footage than ever before and a brand new commentary written specially to fit the pictures and sound recordings. The net result is a complete guide to bird identification, explained in a way impossible with any other medium. This tape covers the species you are likely to see in Britain in systematic order, starting with divers and ending with ducks. It therefore includes the divers and grebes, that's water birds with often spectacular summer plumages, various seabirds including shearwaters and cormorants, the large, long-necked, long-legged herons, and the great variety of wildfowl, including ducks, geese and swans. For a detailed list of contents, please refer to the card that comes with each tape. Notice that each species is given a reference number, corresponding to the one shown here. This number tells you the overall length of the bird in centimetres, from the tip of its bill to the end of its tail. The names shown on the screen are those recommended for international use by the British Ornithologists' Union. In the commentary, however, I've continued to use the traditional names, more familiar to most British birdwatchers. The clear and detailed illustrations by Alan Harris show the different plumages of each species at rest and in flight. The commentary concentrates on how to identify each species in the field, pointing out features which can be seen and heard as you view the footage of each bird. In trying to describe the rich variety of bird calls and song, I've often resorted to making my own imitations of these sounds. These are usually hopelessly unlike the real thing, but I hope you'll still find them useful. Think of them as translations of natural bird sounds into noises which any human, even me, can imitate and remember. The distribution of each species is shown by on-screen maps. Green shows areas where the species is present throughout the year, yellow shows where it is only found in summer, and blue shows the areas visited in winter. The distribution of very rare visitors is shown in grey. Now, let's begin this volume with red-throated diver. The sight of a red-throated diver drifting haughtily across a lochen is one of the highlights of a summer trip to Scotland. Although to most British birdwatchers it's more familiar as a winter visitor, especially around our coasts. In all plumages, the red-throated can be distinguished from other divers by its slimmer profile, generally paler plumage, and particularly by the way its upcurved bill is usually held pointing upwards. In flight, as with all divers, notice how the head and neck seem to droop below the level of the body, creating a hunchbacked appearance. In summer, you may have to get very close before you can see the red colour in its dark throat patch, but its wailing calls can be heard from afar. Listen too for its cackling flight call as it commutes between its breeding and feeding sites. This is the commonest British diver, likely to be seen in winter around any of our coasts. In summer, it nests only in the Scottish Highlands and Islands, preferring smaller moorland lochens to the larger lochs. Great Northern Diver. The rare Great Northern Diver is substantially bulkier than the other divers, with a heavier bill. In summer plumage, it has distinctive dark and pale bands around the neck, and traces of this pattern can still be seen in winter as a diagnostic dark half collar. Notice too that the crown and nape are uniformly dark, and that the head has a curious flat-topped appearance. Sadly, their spectacular yodeling songs are seldom heard in Britain, for they breed only in Iceland and North America. Non-breeding birds are frequently encountered around the western coasts of Scotland, but elsewhere it is usually the rarest of the three British divers. Black-throated diver. The desolate, ringing, rather curlew-like territorial calls of black-throated divers are so evocative of summer evenings beside Scottish lochs. These calls have been likened to the cries of madmen, hence their American family name of loons. The black-throated diver is bulkier and bigger-headed than the red-throat, with a stouter, more horizontal bill and bolder, more black and white markings. Its immaculate summer plumage is unmistakable, and key features in winter include a broad, triangular pale patch around the flanks and more extensive dark areas on the head, nape and neck, contrasting boldly with the paler cheeks and throat. In winter, black-throated divers can be found in most coastal areas, although it is much less numerous than the red-throat. About 150 pairs breed in the larger lochs of northwest Scotland. Little grebe. Little grebes, or dabchicks, are so dumpy in shape that they can look just like a ball of fluff floating on the water. They are the smallest and probably the commonest British grebes, and they can be identified not just by their characteristic shape, but also by the pale spot at the base of the bill, which becomes more obvious in the breeding season. In all plumages they show less contrast than other grebes, their cheeks and throat being dark chestnut in summer and dull buff rather than white in winter. They can be very secretive birds, especially when breeding, but their loud whinnying call often gives them away. Little grebes breed throughout lowland Britain, in areas of shallow, weed-filled water, and in winter they can also be found around estuaries. Great-crested grebe. In spring, great-crested grebes perform unforgettable courtship displays, involving paired dance routines, head shaking, wing spreading, laying their necks flat on the surface, or rising together out of the water like synchronized swimmers. They are the largest European grebes, with slender white necks in all plumages. In winter, the face is mostly pale, with just a narrow black, slightly crested cap. But in summer, this pattern develops into elaborate black and chestnut plumes called tippets. In flight, they appear hump-backed, with conspicuously pale panels in the long narrow wings. The stripy-headed young can often be seen hitching a ride on the backs of their parents. Their rather guttural calls are most frequently heard in spring. Great-crested grebes are common and conspicuous birds of reservoirs, gravel pits and lakes throughout lowland Britain, and can also be seen around the coast in winter. Red-necked grebe. The red-necked grebe is a rather scarce winter visitor, which might reward any birdwatcher who is willing to check his or her local reservoirs during the harshest of cold spells. It most closely resembles the great-crested grebe, but is slightly smaller and stockier, with a thicker, invariably darker neck, and showing some yellow rather than pink in the bill. This young bird still has the head stripes of its juvenile plumage, but notice how the dark crown characteristically extends to below eye level. In a great-crested grebe, the dark eye would stand out against a pale background. By the time this bird reaches summer plumage, it will have a neat white face patch, contrasting with the dark red colour of its neck. Their groaning calls are rarely heard in Britain. The red-necked grebe is most likely to be seen around the coast in winter, but harsh weather often drives a scatter of birds onto inland waters. They don't breed in Britain, the nearest population being in northeast Germany. Slavonian grebe. The Slavonian grebe is another scarce winter visitor, but it can be seen more reliably, and in its more spectacular summer plumage, on its breeding grounds at a few Scottish lochs. The RSPB reserve at Loch Ruthven provides excellent facilities for viewing this colourful rarity. In summer plumage, the long orange head plumes, reddish flanks and white in the wing distinguish the Slavonian from the smaller, dumpier little grebe. A black-necked grebe would have a completely black neck and obviously up-tilted bill. In winter plumage, the white neck and cheeks would eliminate little grebe, and the neat contrast between the clean white cheeks and the dark crown would, along with the bill shape, rule out black-necked grebe. The Slavonian grebe has a whinnying call, reminiscent of little grebe, but given in short, interrupted bursts. About 60 pairs of Slavonian grebe breed in Scotland, mostly on well-vegetated lochs, close to the Great Glen. In winter it is mainly a coastal bird, most likely to occur in northern Britain, with a few stragglers turning up inland. Black-necked grebe. In Britain, the black-necked grebe is rarer than the Slavonian grebe, both in summer and in winter, but English birdwatchers at least are probably more familiar with this species. It occurs regularly in autumn at wetlands close to the English coasts, and birds returning in spring have sometimes stayed to breed in the most unlikely-looking ponds in central England. It most closely resembles the Slavonian grebe, but in all plumages it has a small and characteristically upturned bill, a steep forehead and peaked crown. In winter, the dark crown extends into a dark smudgy area through the eye, thus spoiling the neat contrast between black and white which a Slavonian would show. The squealing calls are rarely heard. Less than 40 pairs of black-necked grebes breed in Britain, mostly at secret localities in Scotland. However, small numbers usually turn up near the east and south coasts of England during July to November, usually on lakes, reservoirs or marshes. Fulmar. If you watch the delicate caressing which goes on between a pair of displaying fulmars, you wouldn't believe that these same birds could spit such foul-smelling oil at you if you were to go too close to their nest. Fulmars look more like gulls than petrels, but their grey wings have pale patches in the primaries and are always held stiffly, either horizontally or slightly bowed. The sheer whiteness of their bodies and relative thickness of their head and neck gives them the nickname of flying milk bottle. At close range, their strange bill, like an unfinished airfix kit, proves that these have nostrils typical of the petrel family. Their chuckling calls are so evocative of summer days at seabird cliffs. The fulmar population has exploded since the turn of the century, when they bred on just a few Scottish islands. Now there are over 500,000 pairs, nesting on almost every stretch of coast wherever there are cliffs. Corys shearwater. The Corys shearwater is a Mediterranean species, which you might have seen following the boat if you've ever been on a Greek island cruise. It is paler and greyer than other European shearwaters, with an obvious pale straw-coloured bill. Even at a distance, though, it can be picked out by its larger size and much slower, steadier, less frenzied flight action. Corys shearwaters are only rarely seen from mainland Britain, although recent birdwatching boat trips into the seas southwest of Ireland have produced many more sightings. Great shearwater. Every summer, about 10 million great shearwaters undertake an Atlantic cruise, leaving their South Atlantic breeding grounds in April, migrating up past the Americas to spend June and July off the coast of Newfoundland, before returning down the eastern side of the Atlantic during August to October. Most of these birds are never seen by British birdwatchers, but a few birds may get blown close to Ireland or Cornwall, and more can be seen by chartering a boat into Atlantic waters. Like the chorus shearwater, this is much bigger and slower flapping than the commoner Manx shearwater. Its identification can be clinched by seeing two pale bands across its upper parts, one just behind an obvious dark cap and one just in front of a very dark tail. Sooty shearwater. Sooty shearwaters which occur in British waters are probably birds which breed in the Falkland Islands, then, like great shearwaters, undertake a grand tour of the Atlantic, this time coming as far east as Norway and therefore occurring even in the North Sea. Their stiff winged flight with frequent gliding is a telltale sign that these are shearwaters, but uniquely they are completely dark, virtually black apart from pale flashes in their underwings. They are bigger than Manx shearwaters, with longer, more swept-back wings. Although they are usually very rare in Britain, if the winds are right, they can be seen in hundreds, passing south down the east coast of Britain or the west coast of Ireland. Manx shearwater. There are over 200,000 pairs of Manx shearwaters breeding in Britain, but their nocturnal habits and preference for isolated islands still makes them difficult to observe. Most birdwatchers are more likely to see them migrating past a headland, flying fast and low over the sea. Characteristically, they flap busily on stiff wings, then glide for a while, occasionally tilting to show first their all-dark upper parts, then their mainly white underparts. For a unique experience with shearwaters, you could stay at one of their colonies, where their cacophony of cooing calls will guarantee an unforgettable sleepless night. Shearwater colonies occur all down the west coasts of Britain and Ireland, from the Scillies to the Shetlands, but migrating birds can be seen in spring and autumn from almost any coastal site. Storm petrel. There are about 160,000 pairs of storm petrels breeding in Britain and Ireland. This represents about 70% of the world population and makes it more numerous than, say, the tree pipit. However, they are most active at night and nest only on remote islands and headlands, so most birdwatchers never get a chance to see them. They are the smallest European seabirds, being scarcely bigger than a house martin and having a similar plumage, with dark upper parts and a conspicuous white rump. However, these petrels have a weak, fluttery, rather bat-like flight, usually low over the sea, and their underparts are completely dark, except for a white line across the underwing. The more rounded, stubby wings and short, square-ended tail help to separate them from Leach's petrels. The incessant purring calls of storm petrels could be heard at night by visiting one of their 30 or so breeding colonies along the west coasts of Britain and Ireland, many of which are in the Orkneys and Shetlands. Unfortunately, they are rarely seen around most of Britain's coasts, although they sometimes appear following gales. Leach's petrel. As a British breeding bird, the Leach's petrel is much scarcer than the storm petrel, but perversely it's a good deal easier to see. On days of strong westerly gales in late autumn, hundreds or even thousands of these birds occur around our western shores, especially on Merseyside, where they can be watched fluttering helplessly along the beaches. Leachers are bigger than storm petrels, with longer, more pointed and distinctively angled wings and a longer forked tail. Their flight is buoyant, bouncing with each wing beat, not unlike a nightjar. They lack the white line under the wing, but instead have a pale grey panel in the upper wing and a faint dark line through the white rump. Their calls feature short purrs, rising in pitch and interrupted by outbursts of impish giggling. The few British colonies of Leach's petrels are almost all on remote islands off the Hebrides, Orkneys and Shetlands. However, to see this species, you'd do better to follow the weather forecasts in autumn before planning a trip to the west coast if gales are likely. Gannet. The exceptionally long wings of a gannet make it seem cumbersome on land, but there is nothing ungainly about the way it dives for fish. The wings close suddenly until they are parallel to the body, which is thrust head first so smoothly into the water that there is barely a ripple, at least until it returns to the surface thrashing about with its prey. Gannets have a variety of plumages, from the dark speckled brown juveniles to the immaculate, mostly white adults, with various brown and white plumages in between. At all ages, though, gannets can be told by their unique shape, with long bodies, pointed at both ends, and impressively long pointed wings, enabling them to fly quickly but effortlessly with long glides. Their incessant grog-grog calls can be heard at any of their 22 British breeding colonies scattered around our coasts. The 1,000 plus pairs at Bempton, Humberside, are the most accessible, but a boat trip to either Grassholm, Duffed, or Bass Rock in the Firth of Forth can put you unforgettably at the heart of over 20,000 pairs. Gannets can usually be found by scanning out to sea from any coastal site. Cormorant. Cormorants are those big, black, rather ugly birds, which you often see standing upright on a post, tree or rock, with their wings held out to dry. Apart from divers, which are smaller, with shorter, fatter necks, more gentle heads and less brutish bills, cormorants could only be mistaken for the smaller but closely related shags. In summer, cormorants are easily distinguished by their conspicuous white patches on throat and thigh. In winter, though, you have to rely on differences in shape, since cormorants have a bigger, more triangular head, a flatter crown and more massive bill. Juveniles are browner and, unlike young shags, have a variable amount of white on their bellies. Diagnostically, the bare yellowish skin around a cormorant's bill extends to around its eye. In flight, cormorants resemble geese, but have long diamond-shaped tails. Cormorants are usually silent, but make various guttural noises in their breeding colonies. Although the cormorant is most familiar as a seabird, commonly found around our coasts, it also occurs at an increasing number of inland lakes and reservoirs, where a few breeding colonies are already established. Shag. You have to see a shag at close range and in good light to see why it is sometimes called the green cormorant. The plumage, which normally looks black, actually has a greenish gloss. They can be told from cormorants by their smaller size, less fearsome head and bill, and peaked crown. In summer, they are completely dark, apart from a limited yellow line around the gape, and they often show a little upright tuft on the crown. The immatures have pale brown bellies, not showing white areas as a young cormorant would. In flight, they are smaller and slighter, with quicker wing beats, resembling a duck rather than a goose, and with the thin neck held straight, not kinked. They are usually silent, but at the nest they make calls resembling the bending of creaky wood. Unlike cormorants, shags are a purely maritime bird, favouring rocky coasts rather than estuaries and hardly ever turning up inland. They occur all around Britain, but are more abundant to the north and west. Almost 50,000 pairs breed around Britain and Ireland, about 40% of the world population. Bittern. Even if the bittern wasn't such a rare bird in Britain, it would still be difficult to see, since it spends most of its time camouflaged deep inside its favoured reed beds. However, its characteristic booming call ensures that it doesn't go totally unnoticed. When a bittern does show itself, it appears as a rather chunky brown heron with somewhat owl-like plumage. In flight, it has the pointed head and bill and long straggly legs of a heron, but its broad, brown, arched wings again recall an owl. The far-carrying call sounds like someone blowing across the top of a bottle. Only about 16 pairs of bitterns remain in Britain, mostly in Norfolk and Suffolk, in reserves such as Cley, Titchwell, Walberswick and Minsmere, plus Leighton Moss in Lancashire. Little egret. The little egret is more delicate looking than any other heron-like bird which occurs in Britain. It is much smaller than a grey heron, with snowy white plumage, a long pointed black bill and black legs with strikingly yellow feet. Little egrets are usually silent, except at their breeding colonies. Little egrets have never bred in Britain, but they occur in increasing numbers as passage and winter visitors, especially in southwest England, and must surely nest soon. Grey heron. The grey heron is a familiar sight, either hunched up roosting in trees, fields or watersides, or stretched motionless over water with its bill poised to snap at potential prey, or flapping majestically on great arched wings. Its huge size, grey plumage and distinctive shape distinguish it from all other birds. The adult is whiter on the neck than the juvenile and has long black tufts hanging down its nape. The heavy, resounding cronk call is distinctive. The grey heron occurs throughout Britain, but is more common at lower altitudes, especially in the valleys of major rivers. Herons travel miles in search of food, so could be found even in areas where they don't breed. Purple heron. The purple heron is another example of a water bird which breeds in Europe just across the English Channel, but hasn't yet started to breed here, despite regular occurrences as a migrant. It is most similar to a grey heron, but is slightly skinnier and more straggly. Its narrower neck can look distinctively looped in flight, and the trailing feet can resemble an untidy bunch of twigs. Plumage-wise, the neck of a purple heron is always brown or chestnut, rather than white or grey, and their upper wing shows much less contrast than in a grey heron. Adults can indeed look purply grey on their wings and mantle, but the juveniles are a sandier brown. The call is quieter and higher pitched than that of a grey heron. Purple herons occur regularly as scarce passage visitors to the south and east coasts of Britain, especially in spring. They are rarely seen except when they fly over the reed beds in which they could one day breed. Spoonbill. The spoonbill is one of nature's most likeable freaks, with an improbably shaped bill, crazy feeding action, and distinctly odd flight silhouette. Spoonbills are mostly white, like an egret but with bigger, fatter bodies, and of course those flattened spoon-shaped bills. Feeding birds swing their heads, sweeping their bills from side to side through the water. Juveniles have paler bills and black wingtips, but it's unusual to find birds like these with so much grey in their plumage. In flight, the neck and legs are outstretched, but held below the level of the body. Spoonbills are normally silent in Britain, where they occur as increasingly frequent passage visitors. Surely it won't be long before some of these try to nest here. Hooper swan. Hooper and Buick swans are sometimes collectively called wild swans, but since Buicks are so easily seen coming to artificial feeding sites at Slimbridge and the Ouse Washers, this leaves the hooper as the only swan which still has the mystique of a wild bird. Some of the adults arrive in Britain still covered in peat stains from Arctic bogs. Hoopers are as big as mute swans, but with straighter necks and yellow on the beaks. Notice how the yellow extends as a triangular wedge down the beak, a pattern visible even on the pinker bills of the juveniles. Hooper swans call spectacularly in flight with trumpeting noises which usually alternate in pitch. Some of their calls really do sound like a distant bugle. Hooper swans have bred at scattered sites in Scotland, but they are more familiar as winter visitors, especially in northern Britain. Tundra swan. The tundra swan is still known as the Buick swan to most birdwatchers. It's the smallest and shortest necked of the European swans, and, like the hooper, has obvious yellow in the bill. In Buick swan, however, this is just a short yellow blob at the base of the bill, rather than an extended yellow wedge. In juveniles, the bill starts off mainly pink, but there is still a paler blob of the same characteristic shape. Its honking flight calls are more goose-like than those of hooper swans. Although the Buick swan is a numerous winter visitor, it's generally restricted to traditional favoured areas, mostly in the Severn Valley, the Solway Firth, East Anglia and Ireland. However, small parties can occasionally turn up briefly in most other parts of the country. Mute swan. A pair of mute swans drifting serenely across an ornamental lake look a picture of grace and peacefulness, but they can be aggressive birds, capable of attacking human intruders to their nests. The mute swan is the common British swan, huge and white with a gracefully curved neck. The black and red beak separates it from the other swans. Cygnets start off grey, then turn into brown juveniles, which already show the distinctive black around the base of the bill. Mute swans are not really mute at all. Admittedly, they are silent in flight, except for the throbbing of their wings, but on the ground they can hiss aggressively or make deep snorting noises. Mute swans are widespread throughout Britain, breeding even in the Orkneys and Hebrides, but mostly restricted to lowland areas, with lakes, reservoirs, canals and slow-flowing rivers. Bean goose. The bean goose was, until recently, considered to be just the European race of the pink-footed goose, but it is so different in size and shape that this now seems ridiculous. The bean goose is the only goose with a black and orange bill, although at a distance it may be hard to prove that the bill isn't really black and pink, as in a pinkfoot. In that case, look at the colour of the upper wing, dull dark brown in a bean goose, frostier grey in a pinkfoot, and also the shape of the head and bill, much longer and smoothly triangular in a bean goose, stubby in a pinkfoot. In flight, the dark upper wing, back and rump separate them from both grey legs and pink feet, and they lack the black belly splodges of adult white fronts. Their calls are deeper, more nasal than those of pink feet. Bean geese are winter visitors to Britain, extremely rare except in two areas, the Yare Valley in Norfolk and the marshes in the Dee and Ken valleys of southwest Scotland. Pink-footed goose. It wouldn't be sensible to identify a pink-footed goose by its pink feet, since grey legs also have pink legs, and juvenile pink feet can have dull orange legs. Instead, you should notice that it has a relatively short neck, small head and stubby bill, with pink and black markings. The head and neck are so dark they look almost black from a distance, contrasting with a pale chest which looks pinkish buff. A pink-chested goose, perhaps. In flight, they show a pale grey forewing, which eliminates all grey geese except grey legs, but the dark head and neck then confirms the identification. Flocks of pink feet make standard goose calls. Pink feet winter in spectacular numbers in some places, notably in lowland Scotland, Lancashire and the Wash, with flocks of birds seen elsewhere commuting between these areas. A few semi-tame birds may also be found with Canada geese, and some of these may even breed. Greylag goose. The greylag goose is the species from which most farmyard geese were bred, as can be seen by comparing their calls and the size, shape and colour of their bills and feet. In the wild, the big, deep-based bill, pink or orange, is always diagnostic, and the pink legs would rule out any species other than pinkfoot. Greylegs are also bigger, bulkier and paler than other grey geese. Notice how the head, neck, chest, belly, upper wing, underwing and rump can all look conspicuously pale grey, making flight identification relatively easy. Flocks of greylag geese can also be recognised by the deep honking quality of their calls. Wild greylags breed in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, but there are also many scattered sites in Britain where feral greylags breed. In winter we receive thousands more, mostly birds from Iceland, which winter in lowland parts of Scotland. Loch Leven, near Kinross, is one place where you can see and hear spectacular flights. White-fronted goose. The white front on this goose is found only on its forehead, and not, as you might expect, on its chest. Geese of other species may sometimes show a thin line of white around the base of the bill, but only in the white front does this make a conspicuous splodge. Unfortunately though, juvenile white fronts don't have white fronts at all. They don't look as dark on the head and neck as pink feet or bean geese, and theirs is a more ordinary bill shape, so they are easiest to confuse with greylegs. However, white fronts have a smaller bill, orange legs and a dark facial area in front of the eye. In flight, the white face patches and black lines across the belly eliminate the other species. White fronts produce a characteristic yapping sound in flight. About 20,000 white-fronted geese of the Greenland race, with orange bills, winter mainly in the Wexford slobs in Ireland, plus the Solway Firth and Islay in Scotland. Birds in southern Britain, especially at Slimbridge and the North Kent marshes, come from Russia and have pink bills. Canada goose. Small numbers of Canada geese were introduced to Britain to decorate the lakes of some of our wealthier estates, but they have subsequently spread and are continuing to increase. In some places they have reached pest proportions, since their abundant droppings and voracious feeding habits can cause real damage to grassland and farmland. The Canada goose is much the largest of the so-called black geese, those with solid black areas in their plumage. In this species the black is confined to the head and neck, where it is further marked by a broad white chin strap. Their honking calls are slower and more deliberate than in the grey geese. Canada geese are already well established in most of England and are continuing to spread into Scotland, Wales and Ireland. They are no longer confined to ornamental park lakes, but have also colonised reservoirs, gravel pits, canals and the like. Attempts to limit their numbers have so far been of little use. Barnacle goose. The barnacle goose is a winter visitor, occurring in spectacular numbers in parts of Ireland and western Scotland, such as Islay and the Solway Firth. It is smaller than the Canada goose, with more silvery grey wings and mantle. It looks as though it has pulled a big black stocking over its head and neck, but its white face has poked through the toes. A huge flock makes an impressive chorus of yapping calls, like a pack of puppies. Barnacle geese can be most easily enjoyed at the reserve at Killaverock, Dumfriesshire, a site which is used by the entire breeding population from Svalbard in the Arctic. Away from such traditional wintering sites, barnacle geese used to be very rare, but small numbers are now often present amongst Canada geese flocks in England. These birds are unlikely to be of wild origin, but they are already breeding freely. Brent goose. In the 1960s, conservationists panicked when a proposed international airport threatened to destroy the mudflats of Foulness Island, Essex, a vital locality for the rare dark-bellied Brent goose. They needn't have worried, for this bird is now taken to feeding in farmland, allowing its numbers to proliferate rapidly and turning it from a rarity into a pest. The Brent goose is smaller and much darker overall than the other black geese and has a shorter, thicker neck, marked in the adults by a little white, smudgy half-collar. From a distance they can look all dark, apart from the gleaming white undertail area. The light-bellied form, which comes from Canada and Greenland and winters in Ireland and northeast England, looks much cleaner and more attractive. Flocks of Brent geese produce deep, rumbling sounds, audible at great distances. Dark-bellied Brent geese now occur in huge, dense flocks all around southeast England, but pale-bellied birds on the Northumbrian coast are less numerous. Shelduck. The handsome shelduck used to be a strictly coastal bird, favouring sand dunes and estuaries, but it's recently adapted well to sites inland, especially gravel pits. Shelducks are significantly bigger and more goose-like than other ducks. They are conspicuous black and white birds, the adults looking as if a big orange bandage has been wrapped around their chest. Juveniles lack this orange band and have a white face and throat and more brown and white plumage. Shelduck are usually silent, but you may hear rather whip-like whistles or goose-like cackling. They are common birds all around our coasts and feed wherever there are muddy or sandy shores. They also occur inland with increasing frequency. In July, there is a mass exodus from Britain, as most of our birds fly to join the rest of the northwest European population for a communal moulting party off the coast of Germany. Widgeon. The wolf-whistling calls of drake widgeon make a wonderful accompaniment to a winter's day at many a British wetland. The drake widgeon is unmistakable, with his rufous head and orange crown, although from a distance it may be the horizontal white line on the body and the black and white rear end that you notice first. The female is relatively distinctive for a dabbling duck, since she is darker, plainer and more rufous than other females, with a characteristic head shape, steep at the front, rounded at the back and with a small grey bill. Widgeon often feed in short grass, so they can be seen out of the water when, in all plumages, they show a neat, rounded white belly patch. In flight, widgeon are fast flyers, with pointed tails and white bellies. The males have an unmissable white patch in the forewing, but in females this is a duller grey. The drake widgeon has an unforgettable call. The widgeon is a widespread winter visitor, reaching spectacular numbers at favoured sites, which could be estuaries, coastal lagoons, large reservoirs or flooded meadows. Small numbers stay to breed in scattered localities, mostly in Scotland. Gadwall. Although the gadwall was introduced to Britain over 100 years ago, it is only recently that it has really started to spread away from its strongholds in East Anglia and Loch Leven near Kinross. The male is unusually drab for a dabbling duck, his grey-brown plumage highlighted only by his completely black rear end, and occasional views of the white in his wing. The female is most similar to a mallard, but is easily identified if she opens her wing slightly to show the white patch. If this is hidden, look for whether your problem bird is slightly smaller and greyer than a mallard, with a distinctive bill pattern. Black down the centre, but neatly yellow-orange along the sides. In flight, all gadwall have white bellies and a diagnostic square white patch in the inner secondaries. Their call is a frog-like croak. The gadwall is now a reasonably common resident bird, especially in South and East England, where they are regularly found on lakes, pools and gravel pits. Teal. The teal is our smallest dabbling duck, and also one of the commonest. The drake has a grey body, dark head and white line along the body like a male widgeon, but the teal is much smaller and with an obvious yellow, almost white, triangular patch at the rear end. The female often has to be identified by her small size and plain grey bill, but look out for the green patch in the speculum towards the rear of the wing and a pale line along the edge of the tail. In flight, teal are fast and agile, their small size, dark body and pointed wings making them appear almost like waders. Many books recommend the green speculum as the best field mark, but, more realistically, look for a short but broad white line across the inner wing, more conspicuous than on any other British duck. Their main call is a high-pitched, ringing prip, prip, prip. About 2,000 pairs of teal breed at sites scattered throughout Britain, but in winter their numbers are greatly swollen by influxes from abroad. The teal is therefore commonly encountered on lakes, reservoirs, gravel pits, estuaries and flooded meadows, with many birds breeding on moorland pools and lakes. Inexplicably, the breeding population has probably halved in the last 20 years. Gargany. Unusually for a duck, the gargany is a summer visitor to Europe, most likely to be seen in Britain during spring and autumn passage. Early migrants can even turn up in March. The male gargany is most striking, with a huge extended white stripe over each eye. Females are harder to identify, but compared with the similarly small teal, they have a more obvious pale eye stripe, pale throat and pale spot at the base of the bill. This gives the whole head a more contrasting, stripy look. In flight, the gargany is agile like a teal, but the males have obvious pale blue forewing patches. In females, the forewing can be grey, but this can be barely noticeable. Gargany also have a more contrasting black and white underwing pattern than teal. The drake gargany produces a wonderful, low, hollow, rattling call. About 50 pairs of gargany are thought to breed in Britain, mostly in eastern England. They are birds of marshes and flooded meadows, rather than open water. Pintail. The drake pintail is perhaps the most handsome of our ducks, the very epitome of grace and elegance. His most distinctive identification feature is the wavy white stripe extending up the side of his otherwise brown neck. But birds with their necks hidden can still be told by their white chests, grey bodies, black and yellow undertails, and of course the long spiky tail feathers. Female pintails like the colourful plumage and the tail spike, but are still unmistakably elegant, with slender, almost swan-like necks, small plain heads, and long, slim, grey bills. Pintails in flight look distinctively slender, thanks mainly to their long necks and long pointed tails. Notice how, in both male and female, it's the white trailing edge to the speculum which is most conspicuous. The pintail call is a rather teal-like whistle, but it lacks the rolling quality of a teal, making it sound simpler, more rounded. Clip, clip, clip. Pintails are relatively scarce, especially in inland Britain, but thousands occur at favoured estuaries such as the Dee, the Mersey and the Wash, and at certain wetlands such as the Ouse Washes. A few pairs linger and try to breed at scattered localities. Mallard. The mallard is our commonest duck, the one you are most likely to be greeted with if you throw out food at your local park pond. Some mallard have been domesticated, and so you may also see mallard-like hybrids, showing bewildering colours from khaki brown to pure white. This displaying male mallard shows his colours very clearly, as well as the diagnostic curly black upper tail feathers. The female mallard is the standard dabbling duck, against which all the others should be compared. It's worth becoming familiar with the size, shape and markings of her head and bill. This bird is obligingly showing her blue speculum with its white borders. Mallard in flight can be told by their relatively large size, the contrastingly dark-chested appearance of the males, and the fact that the white borders on either side of the dark blue speculum are both equally obvious. Their loud quacking calls are distinctive and familiar. Mallard are abundant throughout Britain at all times of year, on wetland areas of all sizes, from the tiniest ponds to the biggest lochs. Shoveler. Every bird book will tell you that shovelers can be identified by their long, broad, shovel-shaped bills. But what if you can't see this because the shoveler is feeding with its bill underwater, as is often the case? Males in perfect plumage are easy enough. No other duck has such bold chestnut flanks, sandwiched by big white patches at the front and rear. Shovelers in most other plumages, especially young or molting males, usually show more than a hint of rich ginger colouring on the flanks. and females also show bolder black and brown feathering than a mallard. Juveniles, however, may only stand out because their posture is typically shoveler-like, as if their front end is sinking, causing the rear to tip up. A good view of the bill, though, will end all speculation. In flight, this big bill, pointing down at a slight angle, makes shovelers look very long-headed. They have obvious pale grey forewings and pale underwing coverts, but they lack pale bellies. The male's call is a hollow chug 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 chug. The female utters a weak quack. The shoveler is mainly a winter visitor to Britain, with large numbers arriving, especially in marshier wetlands, from late July onwards. There is a small breeding population of about 1,000 pairs, scattered throughout Britain, but mostly in certain honeypot sites. The flooded meadows of the Ouse Washers, for example, support over 200 pairs. Pochard. The male pochard looks as if he has a black body, but most of this is wrapped up in copious pale grey bandage. His rich red head is also distinctive. Female pochard can be harder to identify, but there is usually at least a hint of grey-brown on their mantle and flanks, and their faces usually show pale blotches, especially in front of the eye. However, they can be identified even in silhouette by a distinctive head shape, peaked at the top and bulging at the nape. In flight, both sexes show uniquely grey-brown wings, paler across the flight feathers. Their typical call is a nasal grep, grep, grep. A total of up to 50,000 pochard have been counted in Britain in winter, in coastal bays and relatively deep lakes and reservoirs, but only a few hundred pairs breed here, mostly in South and East England. Tufted duck. Male tufted ducks have been wearing pigtails for years, long before male yuppies decided they were fashionable. They are our commonest diving ducks, having exploited the proliferation of reservoirs and gravel pits, which has occurred since they first bred in Britain in 1849. The male tufted duck is distinctively all black, apart from his immaculately neat white flanks, yellow eye and grey bill. The female is mostly chocolate brown, darker than a pochard, and with a slightly paler area on the flanks, similar in outline to the white patch on the male. She usually shows at least the beginnings of a tuft at the back of the crown. In flight, tufties have very dark wings, with a broad white bar across the flight feathers. Tufted ducks make various snorting noises. Tufted ducks are extremely numerous throughout the year, especially in lowland parts of Britain. Reservoirs, lakes, gravel pits and even rivers are all popular with tufties, provided they are big enough and deep enough. Scaup. The scaup is an Arctic breeding duck, in which the female develops a summer plumage. Only in the breeding season does she show a pale smudge behind the ear coverts. The male scaup seems to have a bandaged up body just like on a pochard, but with more obvious grey markings on the mantle. Otherwise he looks much like a tufted duck, but the gloss on his head is green instead of blue. The female scaup also resembles a tufted duck, but she has a striking white face patch around the base of the bill. They have a big, evenly rounded head shape with no sign of a tuft, and diagnostically they have just a tiny nail of black on the tip of the bill. In flight, they look much like tufted ducks, very dark but with broad white wing bars. However, the greyer back of the male scaup should be easily seen. The female's call is similar to that of a tufted duck, but a little deeper. The scaup is mainly a marine duck, occurring in flocks in favoured bays around the British coasts, especially in Scotland. They are unusual inland during the winter, and they don't breed in Britain every year. Eider. The scientific name for the eider is Somateria mellissima, which apparently means very soft body wool, a reference of course to the eider down with which the females line their nests. The incubating females can be engagingly tame, and the males are equally delightful with their bright colours and crooning songs. The male eider can be identified at any range, as he is the only British duck which is whitish, both at the front and on his back. The female, however, is dull brown, not unlike a mallard, but can be identified by her bulky size, heavy body, and a curiously triangular head shape, due to the long gentle slope from the top of the head to the tip of the big beak. In flight, the males show characteristic black and white bits, and the females resemble big, fat, dark mallards. Displaying eiders make wonderful sounds, as if responding to exciting gossip. Oh, oh. Thousands of eider breed around the coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, with colonies also in Northumberland and Cumbria. In winter, they occur more widely around British coasts, but are still most numerous in Scotland. They are rarely seen inland. Common scoter. Scoters are rather stocky black ducks, usually seen in tight groups out at sea. They fly fast and low over the waves in characteristic straggly black lines. If such birds show no white at all on the wings as they fly, they will be common scoter. At rest, male common scoters are simply all black, with a small yellow area on top of the bill. Females are dark smoky brown, but with paler cheeks. Scoters often show spiky tails sticking out of the water. Their calls are rarely heard in Britain, except perhaps at the few places in northern Scotland and Ireland where they breed on remote lochans. Scoters in winter could be seen from almost any coastal watch point, although certain bays, especially in Scotland, are particularly favoured. Inland sightings are unusual, but not exceptional, especially in late summer. Velvet scoter. The velvet scoter doesn't breed in Britain and is generally much rarer than its relative. Males of both species look all black, but the velvet scoter can be identified at close range by the neat, white teardrop just behind the eye, the larger extent of yellow in the bill, around the edges, not just in the centre, and by occasional glimpses of the white patch in the closed wing. Females are like common scoters, but have all dark heads, apart from two small, vague, pale blotches, one behind the bill and another behind the eye. At long range, there is little chance of identifying these accurately, except in flight, when the white secondaries of velvet scoters will be obvious. Velvet scoters could be seen in winter around any of our coasts, especially to the east, but they are most numerous in northeast Scotland, where hundreds occur offshore with common scoters. Goldeneye. The male goldeneye in spring indulges in wonderful head-throwing displays, enticing the females to mate even in wintering areas hundreds of miles from where they will nest. At rest, the male goldeneye looks mostly white, with a dark head, mantle and rear. The big white blob behind the bill is conspicuous and distinctive. Females are harder to identify, appearing dark grey-brown with darker heads and usually showing various amounts of white in the closed wing. Even if this isn't visible, they can be identified by their bulbous head shape, bulging at the nape. In flight, goldeneye are fast, direct flyers, with mostly white inner wings. They make a characteristic whistling noise as they fly by. The snorting brr brr call of the female is often heard. Goldeneye are fairly common winter visitors, often occurring in flocks at sea or in small parties inland, at lakes, reservoirs and rivers throughout the country. Thanks partly to the provision of lakeside nest boxes, they have become established as breeding birds in Scotland. The first pair bred in 1970, and since then numbers have increased to about 100 pairs. Long-tailed duck. Long-tailed ducks are most often seen at frustratingly great distances out at sea, but occasionally they shelter inshore, where their lovely plumages can be better admired. They show a bewildering variety of patterns depending on their age, their sex and the time of year, but they are invariably a mixture of black, white and brown, usually white on the flanks and face. They are small birds with small heads and small bills. In flight, they show uniquely all-dark wings, but with long white shoulder blades. They characteristically land at sea with an unceremonious belly flop. In late winter, you may hear their crooning display calls, higher pitched than eiders and to the distinctive rhythm of "I'm going up, I'm going up." Long-tailed ducks are sea ducks, rarely seen inland, but frequent around the coasts, especially off Scotland. Smew. Mergansers, goosanders and smew are collectively known as sawbills, since their bills are narrow, sometimes very long, and always have serrated inner edges to help with gripping fish. In Britain, the smew is the rarest of the sawbills, occurring only as a scarce winter visitor. The male is unmistakable, entirely white with sparse black lines. The female resembles a small female goldeneye, with a grey body, white wing panel and reddish-brown head, but the large and conspicuous pale cheek patch is distinctive. This pattern may cause confusion with Slavonian grebe, but the smew is bigger-headed and thicker-necked. Their calls are rarely heard in Britain. Small numbers occur in winter, especially on the larger reservoirs of southeast England and the Midlands. Red-breasted merganser. The red-breasted merganser is apparently equally at home in freshwater or saltwater habitats. Mergansers in all plumages are characterised by their scruffy appearance. Even the male, with his reddish breastband and green-glossed head, contrives to look bedraggled. Mergansers and goosanders, in the duller brown plumages of females and immatures, are known as redheads. In a merganser, the red on the head merges gradually into the mucky grey on the neck and body. The shaggy crest and upswept bill add to their eccentrically untidy appearance. In flight, they also look skinny and straggly. The males are almost entirely white on the inner wing, whereas females have only a white panel around the secondaries. In mergansers, this panel is broken by a complete dark horizontal line. They are usually silent, but you may hear weak cackling calls. Mergansers are commonly found as coastal birds in estuaries and bays in winter, but in summer they mostly move inland to rivers, lakes and reservoirs. A population of about 2,000 pairs breeds in Scotland, North Wales, the Lake District and the Peak District. Goosander. If mergansers look scruffy, then goosanders look immaculate, especially the males, their big bodies entirely cream-coloured, apart from a neat black line across the back and the contrasting black-looking head. Females might be mistaken for redhead mergansers, but see how the rich chestnut colour on the head ends abruptly at the neck and contrasts neatly with the pale chest. Also, the white wing panel lacks a dark line through it, and the bill distinctly droops down at the tip instead of being swept up. The crest on this bird is unusually shaggy for a goosander. A neatly hanging mane is more typical. In flight, goosanders have similar wing markings to mergansers, but the male goosander has much more white on his body, and the female lacks the dark line through the pale wing panel. They can be quite noisy, producing gruff, growl, growl calls. Goosanders are much more consistently found in freshwater habitats, occurring throughout the year on rivers, lakes and lochs in northern Britain and Wales. In winter, they are also regular visitors to the lowland lakes and reservoirs of England. Ruddy duck. Between 1952 and 1973, about 70 captive ruddy ducks escaped from Peter Scott's Wildfowl Centre at Slimbridge, Gloucestershire. Since 1960, when they first started to breed in the wild, they have undergone the most dramatic population explosion since the collared dove. By 1991, they had spread as far north as Aberdeen, and the British population was estimated at about 3,400 birds. As British breeding birds, they are already more numerous than either widgeon or pochard. The male ruddy duck is a most striking bird, with a bright chestnut red body, black head and neck, startling white cheeks, and a ridiculous plasticine blue bill. The female is a duller brown, with grey bill and a dark line through her pale brown cheeks. Birds of both sexes often have spiky tails sticking up, proving that they are members of the stiff-tail family. Ruddy ducks are now widespread and relatively abundant in central England, with smaller numbers at scattered localities elsewhere, including East Anglia, Anglesey, Scotland and Northern Ireland. In January, favoured reservoirs in Avon and Staffordshire can have flocks of hundreds of ruddy ducks.